Today is April the 26th, 2013. My name is Jacqueline Provy. I'm sitting here with my friend
Michael Dodsworth.
And we have our cameraman Richard Munson. So do you mind telling us your birthday and age, please?
Sure. My birthday is June 21st, 1944. Makes me 68 years old for another month.
Thank you. So, I'm told that you are a participant of the Vietnam War, is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you participate in any other events like during your service, or?
I did. I had put 4 years, 3 months, day for day in Vietnam. And then I also participated in Quemoy Matsu, where the Chinese and Chinese nationalists were fighting with each other. And we were there trying to keep a lid on it. So I was on a destroyer in the Straits, and they were actually shooting over us. And then we would chase away Chinese submarines.
Wow. So, getting into the service, were you drafted into the service, or did you sign up?
I enlisted in the Navy when I was in high school.
So you were 18, 17 years old?
I was 17, day after I turned 17.
Okay. So why did you join, and why specifically the Navy?
To avoid the Army. No, I'd always wanted to be in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy, my father was in the Navy, my great-grandfather was in the Navy.
Okay. So, after you joined the service, what was going through boot camp like?
I actually went through boot camp in high school.
Okay, so you were in the military program in your high school?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was it's not like boot camp today. It was very, very strict, very regimented. You marched and marched and marched. You also did rifle drills, even in the Navy, which they don't do any longer. It was a very long 9 weeks.
I bet. So, so the first place that you really served was in Vietnam?
No, I actually, when I got out of high school, I was aboard the USS Norris, DD-859, which had just participated in the blockade of Cuba. Cuba was actually the first place I went, and I went to Guantanamo Bay, and we provided security at Guantanamo Bay, and we also went to Jamaica. Jamaica is the first country outside of Cuba, I guess, but Cuba, where you could stay just on the base, of course, was the first country I went to in the Navy.
Okay.
Was Jamaica.
Okay. So, what was your rank in the Navy?
When I retired as a Master Chief.
And during Vietnam?
During Vietnam, I was E3, E4, E5, E6.
Wow. So, going into Vietnam, what was your assignment?
The first assignment I had in Vietnam was called Operation Sea Dragon. That's where they took these old World War II destroyers, which I was on, the USS Colette, DD-730, and we went in so close to the coast that we tried to get them to shoot at us. They had these very large guns, and they would shoot at us. And then way up high where they couldn't see them were spotter planes, and the spotter planes would mark down their location on a grid, on a map, and then later jets would come in and try and take out the gun emplacements. So our job was to get shot at.
Was that ever terrifying?
The first time I was ever shot at, I can remember as clear as yesterday. You're terrified. The last time I was shot at, I have no idea when it was. I couldn't remember. But the first time I remember very, very clearly.
I bet. So your first days of service once you enlisted, do you remember vividly what you had to do, or?
When you first joined the Navy, way back in my day, I imagine it's still pretty much the same. You're on the low end of the totem pole. You do mess cooking, you peel potatoes. This is after you get out of boot camp. You serve food, you wash the dishes, the trays, you clean the heads, you paint, you scrape and sand, and all the menial jobs that they have. But they have to be done by somebody, and it's going to be the most junior personnel. So you get used to it. You hate it, but then as you start to gain more rank and you don't have to do the menial jobs anymore, it gets better.
Okay. So Did you see much combat at the beginning, or?
At the very beginning, no. The first combat I saw, well, very early in the Vietnam War, I was on the USS Colette, which was 12 miles from the USS Turner Joy, which is the incident that started the Vietnam War. At least started at home when they went in full force.
Right.
It was when the Turner Joy got shot at with torpedoes, and we did hear, there's a lot of controversy about that, but we heard the torpedoes on our sonar on the USS Colette. So there's no doubt they were fired upon.
So was that a really hard thing for you to see, or?
No, it was in your training. They weren't shooting the torpedoes at us, so it's a lot easier when they're not shooting at you.
Right. Okay. So, what during the Vietnam War overall, did you sustain many injuries, or?
Never got a scratch. I did several tours in Vietnam, obviously in 4 years and 3 months. I did 2 tours of river patrol boats. Never got a scratch. I got into special warfare after Vietnam, and in special warfare in the Navy, as I broke my back. So all that in combat, nothing, and then in a training exercise.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to recover from that?
10 years. Yeah.
So is that when you got out of the service?
After that stabilized, and I got out. Yeah.
So in Vietnam, were supplies okay, or was there any kind of lack of supplies?
No, the supply issue with the American military, it changed now because the military is so downsized. But at that time, we lacked for nothing, really. I mean, I have to say that. We lacked for some judgment on the part of our senior personnel, like the president. President Lyndon Johnson actually tried to call missions himself when he was no military man. He didn't trust the military, didn't like the military, and he got a lot of people killed. But there's nothing you can do about it. Our system is that the civilians are in control.
Right.
So
in downtime, what was there to do?
Well, downtime, there's no real downtime when you're over there. It's 24/7. You can't afford what you would think of as downtime. There's no, for instance, at the EM Club in Da Nang. Da Nang is a port that we pulled in and out of a lot. You get mortared. So you're relaxing, but you still would have mortar attacks, you know. Vietnam was a tough war because we didn't go over as a unit. Most of the time they were shipping individuals in and out. And I can remember going over to pick up replacements, and their plane was mortared on the runway. So 71 guys died that never even set foot on Vietnam. They were mortared, they never got off the plane.
Wow.
So it was a difficult war. But all wars are difficult wars.
Right. So, did you have any problems with any of your soldiers or your higher-ups, or were you generally okay with?
No. Senior military do not look after the enlisted men. I learned that. Everybody learns it when you make the higher pay grades. For instance, when you make E9, which is as high as an enlisted man can go, and you find out that a master chief or a sergeant major with 20 years of service makes less money than an ensign or a second lieutenant with 2 years of service. That's when you find out that the senior officers aren't looking out for you. And we see that now. They're taking away our benefits, they're taking away our medical benefits. They didn't tell you when you joined, they told you you would have medical for life. Now all of a sudden, that's gone. You know.
So do you retain any photographs of what life was like, you know, on the ships, or what you were like back then?
I do, but I don't have them. You know, my parents had them, and I don't know where. My parents are still alive. My mother's still alive. I'm sure she's got them squirreled away somewhere.
Right. So, did you write letters back home during service? Who did you write them to? Your parents, or did you have a significant other at home?
girlfriends, buddies, fiancés, you know.
So you had no kids during that time?
Not early in the war, much later. I was there 1964 when it really started big, and I was there when it ended in 1972 or 73.
Right.
And so I got to see the whole spectrum. Early in the war, it was kind of crude. It wasn't built up. 1964, you pulled into Da Nang, and you actually provided security for the base. The ships took so many people off, and myself being one of the younger guys, 19 years old, they hand you an M1 and a helmet and a bandolier of ammunition and say you're out there on guard duty. You know. Later in the war, it was very sophisticated. Lots of security. It was just a whole different thing. It was all built up. The base looked like a city, you know, where it looked like jungle when we first got there with some huts, you know, and then 4 years later, it was an amazing transformation. But remember, it was a very long war. It was a 12-year war, so.
So, do you remember the last day of like your of Vietnam, like what you consider the last day? Because from our understanding, there was a lot of different things you could consider the end. Like when Linebacker 2 ended on December 29th in 72, that was, you know, when they had pulled out a lot of the troops, but at the same time, the fighting didn't stop in North Vietnam until January 15th of the following year.
Yeah.
So
we were gone. It was called Peace with Honor, and it was baloney. We turned it over to the South Vietnamese, and in a year they were destroyed. And when we turned over all of our equipment to them, they had the fourth largest air force in the world. They had a huge navy with all the ships and PBRs, that's Patrol Boat River, that we turned over to them. We turned over a lot of equipment to them. We turned over attack dogs, hundreds of them to them. But their heart wasn't in it, you know. And it for many of them, it never was, even from the very beginning. They were taken out of a village and told they were going to be in uniform, and they were a rice farmer one day. Same with the Viet Cong. And what a lot of people don't understand is that Viet Cong, after the Tet Offensive of 1968, was never an effective fighting force. I mean, we clobbered them, but most people think that we lost the, you know, and it's really galling to people who were there when they say you lost the war. We didn't lose the war. We pulled out the year before South Vietnam lost the war, you know. And President Nixon just wanted out because it was politics, which is why I would never tell my children to go in the military. I feel so bad for these kids in Afghanistan. It's the same thing. They're going to die over there and nothing's going to change. Nothing changed in Vietnam. 59,000 young Americans are still over there or died over there, and many of them are still over there. And it changed nothing. We were told about the domino effect and all of Southeast Asia was going to fall into communist. Nothing's changed. And the first thing Vietnam did after they won the war was attack China. So how much peace did they want? You know, the politics always muddies the water.
So, did you often go on leave and return back to the United States during the Vietnam War? How were you treated?
Terrible. Terrible. I can actually remember in the POD, which is a plan a day, I was stationed in San Diego between tours in Vietnam, and if you were leaving the base, if you were not in a private vehicle, you had to wear civilian clothes because they were beating up military people that they've caught out in town in uniform. And I can remember being at the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, and it was when I first got back. I had just made E5. I was very proud, you know, that's like a sergeant in the Army. And people on buses were spitting on me, and it was horrendous. We were called village burners and baby killers and all these things, you know, thanks to the anti-war movement with all these Hollywood types that really had no clue as to what they were talking about. And we would try to explain to people, but nobody would listen. Look, you don't talk to us, talk to the civilian leadership. You're lucky enough to have a military that doesn't run things. You're lucky enough to have a military that goes where the civilians tell them to go and come back when the civilians tell them to come back. A lot of countries would love to have that. So why you're all ticked off at us, I don't know. You know.
And most of the poor treatment of the soldiers, it started with the one group of soldiers who attacked that specific village.
Village of My Line? No, it started way before that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, way before that.
It was just because of Vietnam in general. And
Vietnam in general was just a very unpopular war. I can understand it now more than I could understand it then. Okay, that it was an unpopular war. I was amazed to get back and find out that my father, a World War II combat vet, was dead set against the war.
Really?
Yeah, and it amazed me, you know. But the way the media portrayed it was totally out of context. We actually took a reporter from Time magazine with us, and then we saw the article he wrote about the mission, and we told him, man, he lied about everything in here. And he said, I didn't lie, show me one lie. And there wasn't one lie in it. But because he left out so many things, omissions become lies, because you're only telling part of the story.
So the media greatly
Exaggerated everything about the war from our point of view. But from the Viet Cong point of view, these were freedom fighters, they were, you know, and these were people who the Viet Cong would torture villagers if they found out they were cooperating with Americans. I mean, it was a terrible thing to see. I saw a woman staked out in a village, 9 months pregnant, almost 9 months pregnant, with her stomach cut open by a sword and the fetus exposed, and then they brought in pigs to eat out of her, eat the fetus alive. And the entire village was made to stand around and watch. And that was because they had cooperated with the Americans.
That's horrible.
Mm-hmm. That part, that didn't get told. And yet we had a reporter with us.
So what would you say was your most memorable experience that you remember from
in the military?
Yeah.
Actually, it had nothing to do with the war. It was long after the war. I started something called Operation Straight Talk, which was a drug prevention program in the 5th and 6th grades in the Southern California school districts. I would actually go into the classrooms and talk to the students about drugs and how to avoid using drugs. And I told them straight talk meant that I didn't tell them a bunch of baloney about it. You can't lie to these kids. They find out you tell them one lie, everything was a lie. So you have to tell them what it is. Will drugs make you feel good? Yes. They'd all say no. And I said, if they didn't make you feel good, why would anybody use them? You know, and then explain to them, but they don't keep making you feel good forever. Pretty soon you have to take them to keep them feeling, just to feel normal. And after that, you need to take it a lot more to keep feeling normal. And I would tell them about the pitfalls, and we would go through what a drug pusher looked like. You know, they would draw a picture, I'd have them come up, and there'd be this hideous creature that they would draw with warts and a third eye and all this stuff, you know, and said, well, you know, if drug pushers all look like that, it'd be real easy to avoid them. But what if a drug pusher looked like your cousin, your brother or sister, older brother or sister, your best friend wanted you to use drugs? Then what? It's a lot tougher to say no. You know? And I should have copyrighted it. I started to Just Say No. It was in the classroom, and I would tell the kids, you know, nobody's got a magic bullet to protect you, but there's one thing you can do that will protect you. No matter what your teachers or parents or me or anybody else would like to do, we can't do it. We can't protect you. You can. Just say no. And make up an excuse, I would tell them. Tell them your father's a dirty SOB and he has you drug tested, and you know, and it did very, very well, but we never got funding. I took bad advice. I was offered funding from Anheuser-Busch to do it on a nationwide scale, and I had advice that said, oh, you can't take money from an alcohol company. So, you know, it was very nice for a couple of years, but it faded away, you know. And most people said that I was talking to the wrong people, because this was the early 80s. And they said, you don't want to talk to those people. They're sixth graders. You want to talk to high school and college kids. And my point of view was, you're talking to high school and college kids, you're preaching to the choir, or you're talking to people who just aren't going to listen to you. Because their life hasn't fallen apart yet because of drugs. They're still enjoying it. You know, talk to them maybe 10 years from now, and maybe I have an audience. The time to get them is in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And that obviously since has been proven out since that time.
Right. So when you finally got out of the service, did you just go back to work, or did you pursue a career, or did you go back to school?
I started a business in San Diego, and it was a distributing business for alligator meat, and I made a lot of money. And then I went into business with the Thai government, and I lost a lot of money. So I went to the library, because I was a single parent with a 3-year-old little girl, and I found out the 3 highest paying professions. They were doctor, lawyer, and stockbroker. Stockbroker made the most. So I became a stockbroker, and I was a stockbroker for 18 years, and I retired from that. Now I don't do anything. I lost all my money at Lehman Brothers, the only bank that President Bush didn't bail out. So if he wants to send me $521,000, he's certainly welcome to.
So during your entire service, did you make any really close friendships with any of the other soldiers? Any that
Sure.
you retain today?
Yeah. Very few, but some. When you're in a special warfare community, it's a very tight-knit community. Everybody knows everybody, but the special warfare communities changed dramatically from when I was in it. Now they're making movies about SEALs, and they're taking them on base and showing them the training that the SEALs go through, and they show them the tactical operations the SEALs do, which was absolutely verboten when I was in. It was very secretive. And now they just tell everybody. But I got lucky because I went through, before BUDS, I went through underwater swimmer school in Key West, where the water's like a bath. So it was a lot easier.
Right. So did you become a part of a veterans organization when you got back, or?
No, I haven't. No, never have.
Do you think you have any interest in doing so?
What I found, I did visit a couple. Most of the veterans organizations are people who put in 2, 4, 6 years. Those are the kinds of people. I didn't find a lot of retirees there. And so your experiences are really very different. For instance, a lot of people don't understand that retired military are not considered veterans. They're considered retirees. Actually, someone who put in 2 years gets a lot more benefits from the VA than a retiree who put in 25 years. Go figure, I don't know, but I think our military is very taken advantage of. And I tell the kids this today, they love you when you're dying for them. Other than that, forget it. I was in Vietnam when we got the first pay raise since World War II. When I came in, I made the same $54 a month that my father made in 1941 when he went in for World War II. So you can't count on the politicians to take care of you. The public loves you when you're bleeding, when people are dying for them. In times of peace, not going to happen. You can see that this year they're giving the military a 1% pay raise. For 3 years, they didn't give any pay raise. And we're still fighting in Afghanistan. So
you would say that your years of service have changed your opinion of the military and war in general? Or?
Not of the military. The military is very poor training, for instance, to become a stockbroker like I did. I couldn't do a trade that wasn't in a customer's interest, a client's best interest. Whereas other people had no problem with it. They could rip people's hearts out. They could destroy them, take their entire fortune from them. It didn't bother them a bit. Where I just couldn't do it. And I was very good at what I did. My clients would do whatever I told them to do, but I could not take advantage. So I was never a huge producer. You know, that $521,000 I'd saved, it was at Lehman Brothers. There were guys that made that in 3 months, not 18 years. You know, so if I didn't have any compassion, I could have made a lot of money. I could have made a lot of money as a stockbroker. But after 25 years in the military, and the big difference is when you get out of the military, you're used to people, if they told me something was done, it was done. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, it was done. Then you become a civilian and people would say anything to you and it didn't really have any bearing on the facts. they would tell you, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I did that, and it was all baloney. It takes you a long time to acclimate to that. When I started my business, I would trust people for the money, you know, to pay me. And quickly found out that was a bad idea. You had to make them pay in advance.
So, you would say that the military, well, it prepared you in ways for after you retired, it prepared you in ways that were good, but at the same time, it left you unprepared in ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're just not. I think it gives you a tremendous work ethic. It gives you a moral compass. But when you're in a society where a lot of them don't have that you're working with, it can be a real detriment because you tend to believe people, or at least the first few years that you're out. You know, you tend to believe people. Somebody tells you something's done, or they're going to do something, or they're going to pay for something. You take it as gospel, and it's not. So it's a big help in some ways, and in other ways it's a real hindrance.
Right. So, did you receive any medals or badges?
Mm-hmm. A lot of them, yeah.
Do you know? Could you tell any specific ones?
Oh. Been a long time. I've been retired 25 years. I had national defense, of course, combat action, Vietnam campaign, 8 awards, Vietnam service, good conduct, 8 or 10 awards, something like that. Several others that I really don't recall anymore.
So, going back to something you said earlier in the conversation, how you were involved when it came to the blockade of Cuba. What was your opinion on our involvement with Cuba at that time?
I was actually in a few months after that. The ship I was on, my first ship, USS Norris, DD-859, had been in the blockade. So all the guys on the ship, when I got there, were still all talking about it, you know. So I couldn't give you a real opinion that I wasn't there. I know from having lived through it.
So you were saying that that the treatment of the soldiers had started long before the
incident
village.
In my life.
Right.
Yeah.
So what actually happened there?
Lieutenant Calley was leading a platoon. He was a second lieutenant. Passed the village and they started taking fire from the village. Now a lot of the reporters didn't want to believe that, or at least reported it because their editors didn't want to hear that they had been taking fire from that village. That's not what sold papers or magazines. But every time a patrol passed that village, they took fire. And many times when they took fire, people died. And finally, it reached a boiling point where a patrol went by there, they took fire, and they just returned it. And they returned it, in kind. I mean, they really went off. I mean, you can only see your buddies die next to you so many times, and you get enraged by it. And they were enraged, and they went in there and they gunned down everything. It's true, they shouldn't have just indiscriminately fired through the village.
So is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up the interview?
Well, we have a limited amount of time, so I think I've said just about everything, but I will say one thing to young people: question authority. Don't take for granted that the Afghan war is good, that this war is good, that that war is good. Question, make up your own minds, do some research, all right?
Thank you very much for your time.